we have the same values in terms of how we expect to be treated and want to treat other people. I think we have the same work ethic. I think there's a shared integrity there that I think is really important. And I think integrity is something that's really hard to find, and especially integrity when there's pressure. Integrity is sort of the first thing I feel like to go out the window when there's pressure.
Hey friends, Jason Jaggard here. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you. It is wild to think that it's been 4 years since we launched this podcast. Over 100 episodes later, we've had listeners tune in from more than 30 countries and hit over 160,000 downloads. And along the way, we've had some incredible conversations with elite performers and clients, from the Fortune 500 to the NFL, from the stage to the screen. Now, whether you've been here since the beginning or this is your first listen, we are so grateful. Your curiosity, ambition, and willingness to grow are what makes this community so powerful. And the best part, we're only getting started. Welcome to the Beyond High Performance podcast, featuring content and conversations from me, Jason Jaggard, along with our elite coaches at Novus Global, their high-performing clients, and the faculty of the Meta Performance Institute for Coaching. On this podcast, you'll hear some of the world's best executive coaches and high-performing leaders, artists, and athletes discuss how they continue to go beyond high performance in their lives and businesses. Today's conversation is such a gift for anyone in a leadership role. In this episode, we go behind the scenes of Sovereign, a gripping new film that is in theaters now and available to stream via Apple TV and Amazon. It stars Nick Offerman, Dennis Quaid, and Jacob Tremblay, and is already being hailed by critics as one of the best films of the year, with a Hollywood Reporter calling it necessary viewing. Joining me are the film's producer, Nick Moceri, and writer-director, Christian Swegal. Nick is the founder of All Night Diner, a studio and consultancy working across film, TV, podcasts, and digital. He's also the co-founder of Donut Media, which became the world's fastest-growing automotive media brand before being acquired in 2021. Christian is a writer and director who's worked with iconic figures like Werner Herzog and developed projects for AMC and Sci-Fi. Together, we unpack what high-stakes leadership looks like under creative and logistical pressure, how they led through storms, literal ones, rewrote major scenes on the fly, managed safety in a post-Rust era, and guided a diverse cast, each in a different phase of their career with empathy, precision, and clarity. In this episode, we explore why filmmaking is like trying to paint a masterpiece in a bumper car, how to lead when people are pulling in different creative directions, the dynamics of co-leadership and building trust through conflict, what it means to truly serve a team even when the cameras aren't rolling, how art can model civil discourse in a time of extreme polarization, and how purpose and passion can fuel careers that take decades to crystallize. We'll also discuss how the film compassionately explores themes of fatherhood, masculinity, mental health, and extremism without preaching or politicizing. It's a rare kind of storytelling, one that invites nuance and opens up space for real conversation. And of course, full disclosure, I'm an executive producer on Sovereign, and I'm proud to put my name on a project that not only delivers as a film, but also models the kind of art I believe we need more of. So if you're a founder, an executive coach, or anyone leading people through complex terrain, this conversation will leave you with insights, inspiration, and maybe even a little more courage for your own path. Let's get into it. Nick and Christian, thank you so much for being on the show. How you guys doing?
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh man, it's a thrill. I've been looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. So we'll drop right in. Quick story. I'm going to go back in time to me walking out of seeing Dune in the Chinese Grauman Theater, which I think is the best theater. Both of you guys are in LA, best theater in the country, I think. And walking out of the theater, and it was a defining moment for me because up until that point, whenever I'd seen a movie, I was always like, man, why can't they be good? And walking out of Dune, I had a shift where I was like, it's amazing any movies are ever good. Because that movie was so good. And I was like, what a miracle to be able to have that many people pull something off like that. And so I think it's really easy to go to the theater or to, click purchase on a film or whatever and watch it and literally sideline armchair quarterback and to pick apart things and everything, not really realizing that it's like a Christmas miracle anytime a movie is even remotely good. And so my first question is, why is that? Like, why is it so hard? We'll get to your film here in a second, but why is it so hard to make a good movie?
The old adage is nobody sets out to make a bad movie. And I think that is mostly true. I do think that some people make films cynically just to chase trends or chase box office or that kind of thing. But let's set that aside and say people are trying to make a good movie, and there are so many things that can go wrong at every step. I mean, first it's in the development stage. Developing scripts is subjective. Is the script good or not? There's no, way to know if that's going to work. And then the alchemy of the cast, the crew, the location, the weather, the budget, the financing. And then even if you can get through the movie, then the edit is like the next chapter of authorship. And then you get to the marketing of the film. And so there's just a million ways for a thing to fail. And so the path to goodness is narrow and the path to greatness is paper thin.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think what's interesting is, filmmaking it's an industrial art. And those two things are sort of hard to put together. You have industry and art. Like, how do you do art at a scale where you need to have, like on a movie like Dune, maybe thousands of people rowing in the same direction and making very, very nuanced, subjective decisions all in alignment. And then you throw in elements like time and weather and location moves and sickness and extreme emotion and personalities and celebrities. And, it's like trying to paint a masterpiece in a bumper car. And, I think getting the thing made, first off, just even getting the financing to get it made, but then actually making the thing. If you think of even like how complex it is to build a building or to, just even build a small house, when you're talking about making a film, it's that level of sort of construction and industry, but applied to something completely subjective like art. And those two things are very hard to marry and to find a control and a consistency across all of those departments.
Yeah, well, and compared to other arts like painting or even, so when our book came out, I essentially had almost entire creative control. You have some constraints in time and things like that. And Christian, we'll get to you writing the script here in a second. Like when you're writing, it's never quote done, and that's how that works. But like I got to pick the cover. I got to pick essentially when it came out. Every word in every chapter is exactly the way that I want it to be. With filmmaking, just briefly talk about how many stakeholders there are. Like there are. What are the different pockets of people that can pull this thing like Lancelot's horse in four directions at once?
Well, I guess I'll answer a little bit of that, but there's stakeholders, on the business side, the marketing side, the distribution side, there's artistic stakeholders in the cast. The department heads all have their separate career tracks. You're trying to find a way for all of those things to work synergistically. And that's why it's so important that every single member of your team be somebody that you can really trust and you can rely on, and you're all making the same film. And, that's the dream scenario, and it's the thing we're always chasing. I don't think it usually works out like that or always works out like that, but that's what you're trying to align for, I think.
Yeah, and even if your interests are aligned, which most of the time they are making a movie, everyone thinks that they know what's best for each different facet of the process and production. And because it's art, it's subjective. And so then ego comes into play and, it's a kitchen with a lot of cooks at times.
Yeah. And I like what you said, Christian, you mentioned all trying to make the same movie. I feel like that's so relevant, by the way. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, why are we talking about movies? Because I believe making a movie is one of the hardest leadership acts in the world. It is very difficult to do. And we're going to get into some leadership techniques and what Nick and Christian bring to a set and how they lead those things in a second. But just to point that out, like oftentimes in a company, as a leader, sometimes, I don't know if you're listening to this, you've ever had the moment, if you're in any kind of like senior level of leadership, you're like, I don't know if everybody here is trying to make the same company. I don't, like, they're trying to make the same movie. And that can be literal, by the way. You can have some people on the finance side wanting it to be like even cross genre. Like you can be fighting about, is this a thriller? Is this a drama? Is this action? Is this a romance? Like, what is this? And everyone can pull at the threads of that. And in companies, I think it's the same thing. Like, what's the culture like? What are we really going after? Different product creep as everyone starts bringing their ideas, and all of a sudden this thing becomes this bloated thing. And we just wanted to start the company to do this, but now there's all these other features and everything. And so this is incredibly relevant. And I want to pivot here just for a second, because not only Now, obviously, you've allowed me to be an executive producer, and so full disclosure on that. But I love this movie. Sovereign is so good. And while I was watching it, I had the same experience. Obviously, Dune and Sovereign are different types of stories.
A little bit.
But yeah, a little bit. And it was the same feeling. It was like, how are movies ever this good? And so I'd love to start with Christian, and then we'll bring Nick in terms of the origin story of this thing, and to pull the curtain back and show us how a piece of art that is very good. And the Hollywood Reporter calls it necessary viewing. I just read another review a few days ago that called it one of the best pictures of the year. And so, Christian, let's go back to when there were no reviews, no Tribeca premiere, no, famous people who are in Tom Cruise movies starring in the picture, and it was just you. What happened?
Yeah, thanks for that. The writing part is the very beginning is really the loneliest part, because these things snowball. By the end of this process, there's now a couple hundred, if not, I don't know how many, but probably a couple hundred people who are now invested in this thing, and it starts small. It started, I guess I can say, yeah, it started with me sort of alone writing this thing, and you don't know if it's any good. And actually, I remember turning in the first draft to my manager, and I said to him, I was like, I don't really know what I just wrote. I think it's kind of cool. Check it out. But I just knew that it was something that, there's so many times, like, especially as a creative, you're trying to make your living as a creative. That's a very different thing. There's a difference between being a creative as a hobby or as a passion, and then doing it when you have children to put through school and food to put on the table and your life depends on it and there's no steady check. So there's a lot of pressure to think with your business brain when you're creating, like, how is this going to be castable? Who's the market for this? Blah, blah, blah. All those market pressures. I found personally in my career, and I know this is advice that like film students get, but I do believe it's true. Like, this movie I wrote with none of that in mind. It was something that I just was interested in. I, for kind of almost for the first time in my career, just put all that stuff aside and just said, I want to just do something purely creative that I'm fascinated in. I don't know if anybody else is going to like it. But then the next part of that is you have to get people that start to believe in it. The next person was Nick. Nick read it. And now it wasn't just me alone. It was he and I. There were two. And then our cast gets involved, then Nick Offerman and Dennis, and now there's four of us, and five, and then those guys, that's when it really gets exciting. Then the agents get excited. And so it's this incredible process to watch this thing start to snowball. I assume it's probably similar to starting a company or something else. You're sort of like a founder in a way.
Well, literally, because you start, by the way, and I may mention this on other episodes, because every now and then we do have people from the industry come in, the film industry. You mentioned it's a startup. It is. Every film is its own separate corporate entity. So it is a startup. Now, actually, Nick, I'm curious, when you first read the script, what % of what you saw is what we're now seeing? Because by the time this podcast drops, it'll be available in theaters and on demand. And so people can watch it tonight if they want. And we hope that you do. But Nick, what did you like? How much of it changed? Was some of the key themes that are so resonant to audiences right now and to critics, was that present in the script, or did that evolve over time?
Yeah, absolutely. It was there from day one. I mean, I would say percentage wise, it was probably 90% of the way there. Like, I read this script. I knew Christian's agent from past business together. He sent me the script. I read it that night. I try to read fast. It's sort of a, dirty secret in this business that no one likes to read, but I do. So I try to read really fast, and I read it, and I was just so blown away and moved. And I knew it was a really challenging movie. But I also knew that it needed a champion, like someone to really, like, this was going to be a hard one to make. And so it needed someone to jump in. And I could see on the page, like, the characters, the themes, the emotion, the structure. And then Christian and I worked together to develop it to that last kind of 10%.
And then Christian, how does one go about getting Nick Offerman and Dennis Quaid and eventually Thomas Mann and Jacob Tremblay to to sign on to words on the page?
That's all credit to Nick. Actually, I mean, that's a producer thing. My job is to write the script and direct the movie. In terms of interfacing with agents and getting things in people's hands and pushing and all of that, that's the domain of a great producer, really.
Well, and Christian and I, we're trauma bonded over this movie, and so there's a lot of outdoing one another in honor, because the way we got these good of actors is he had to write that good of a script. Like, that's the truth of it. Like, I try to attach actors to things all the time, and if the script quality is not there, you're not going to get them. And so in this case, Christian wrote a beautiful script. He had an accompanying treatment that really talked about just the in-depth nature of these characters, the true life events. And so then when we started approaching actors, it was easy as me as a producer, sort of the salesperson in chief, to kind of get out and say, this thing is amazing. It's worth your client's time. Check it out. And then they had to meet with Christian, because Christian, technically this is his first feature film, and that requires an amount of trust. And I think that they saw my involvement was like, okay, Nick's made independent films. He's made films with first-time directors. There's a baseline trust, but then it was them meeting with Christian and seeing that not only is it a great script, but there's a really intentional and solid and compelling vision and leader behind this.
Yeah, by the way, I tell people, so Nick Moceri and I have known each other for a long time, and I tell people that Nick reminds me of Harry from Armageddon when everything's going wrong, and Ben Affleck, I can't remember if he tells Billy Bob Thornton or whatever, but he's like, Harry will come through. He doesn't know how to fail. And I think Nick doesn't know how to fail. So that being said, because you mentioned trauma bonding, and by the way, I was another friend of ours was talking. He just wrapped up his first feature film, and his buddy told him, his buddy who's like a major filmmaker, like multiple Oscars, all this kind of stuff, told him that this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. And our buddy was like, it'll be great. And I saw him the last week of shooting, and he was like, this was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it was great, And so talk to us a little bit about, if you can, give us like maybe one story from shooting where it's just like, oh man, I don't know if this is going to work. Do you have anything that you are allowed to say? I know that
I have a couple of those for sure. I know we both do. Yeah. I mean, the hardest thing for me was the shoot. I mean, I don't know, should I have spoilers or not spoilers? But the climax at the end of the movie, the action at the end of the movie, that big scene, we were supposed to have multiple days to shoot that scene. And it was a very tight schedule, even with multiple days. On a normal scale film, a scene like that would have been shot over the course of, I don't know, maybe a week, 5 days, something like that, maybe even more. And we had like 2 or 2.5 days scheduled, and lightning strikes hit Northwest Arkansas.
Like literal, not like inspiration.
Yeah. Actual light. So we had a lightning storm come in, and we're all standing there waiting. And there's this rule that once there's a lightning strike within a certain radius, your set has to shut down for 40 minutes or something like that. And every time there's a lightning strike in that radius, it resets. And so we were just in this parking lot in the pouring rain and then we'd have somebody call out another strike, another 40 minutes. And I just watched the whole day go. So we lost a day, and we had to pack that entire sequence into one day. And because we'd been standing out in the rain waiting to see if we could shoot that whole day, I had like the evening to figure out, exhausted on like day, 23 of our shoot or something, how we're going to do this. And I truly didn't know how it was going to happen. And that was the most stressful moment. But we just showed up, and it was like it got broken into these tiny little chunks. And then, without getting too technical, there's a way that you can block shoot things in the same direction, so that you're not, because every time you point the camera somewhere, all the trucks and everything have to move behind camera. So you can't just freely shoot around the place. You've got hundreds of people with cars and their rigs. And if anybody moves a semi truck, you know how long that takes with the beeping, and then everybody's got to move their little tents. And so it's just this circus. So we had to completely shoot that whole sequence out of sequence in these tiny little bites, so that we'd be shooting in the same direction of light. And it was just the most chaotic, stressful thing. And I had no idea if it was going to work or not really until the edit, but it did.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Well, I just can't imagine watching the time tick. I mean, we don't have to talk about this during the recording, but like, what's like the production budget per day? Like, you're just watching money burn.
Well, and yes, we lost a day and a half to lightning strikes and weather, and every day on set is hard. There are no bad days. The only bad days is when someone gets hurt, right? And that's my job, is to make sure that me along with the AD and everyone, is to make sure that no one gets hurt. And so when extreme weather comes in, we had one night we were shooting just a simple nighttime exterior. Storm came in and winds whipped up and it got dangerous quick. And so we shut down. When we had the lightning strikes that Christian was talking about, literally like the wind came through and ripped the sign off the grocery store that we were sheltering in place under. And again, we fired someone from the crew that day because during the strike, it was, you have to stay in place. You cannot go out to the trucks. You cannot touch anything. And he wouldn't listen and wanted to go get his cell phone out of the truck. And he walked back and we said, that's it, you're done. Because he put us at risk. He put the production at risk. He put others at risk. And, it's just, that's the only thing that matters. And, with this big shootout that we have at the end too, like we were one of the first indie productions after the Rust tragedies. And so we made sure that we had top-notch, stunt coordinator, weapons experts, all that stuff, just to make sure that everyone's safe at every point.
Yeah, and I'd love for you to go into a little detail, but just so people who are listening, like, why does it even matter? Like, okay, so it thunderstormed one day, just add an extra day on the back end. Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of independent film, right? Like, you don't have a studio with some massive credit line that can just step in with that cash and pay people for all of that. And so you have insurance for these things and you have contingency. But since we were at the end of our shoot, our contingency had been spent already. And an insurance claim would have taken a number of weeks to recoup that money. And so we just didn't have the money in the bank account to make that happen. And so, scenes had to get rewritten. There was a sequence, unfortunately, that had to be cut out of the film to make room for this. And we were able to, somehow squeeze in like one day of being able to do this big set piece. And, for people who, it's a little bit technical, but for non-film people, the way you shoot a movie is you shoot everything in one direction because your crew is all behind the camera. And then when everybody's ready to switch, you shoot the other direction and everybody moves. But when you're shooting an action set piece with one or two cameras, and it's in 360 degrees, you're constantly moving people around. And that circus and that coordination is a very complicated logistics problem to solve. With a large team of people, because you're kind of like a football team almost. You're doing this choreographed moving, and each move takes a certain amount of time. So the challenge then just doesn't become, well, how do I shoot this and make it compelling? It becomes, how do I shoot this with the available sunlight in the directions I need to shoot? Because each time we change directions, it's 15 or 20 minutes down. And that puzzle is something that you're then told, okay, you got to figure it out right now. And you're losing sunlight and you've got one day. And if you don't do it, the movie doesn't work.
What is it?
If that scene doesn't work, this movie doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever seen a film where that doesn't work, it's jarring. You're in the middle of a scene and all of a sudden something doesn't make sense. And you're thinking, why'd they do that? And it's because they ran out of time. So, yeah, it's hard. It's like being in a bumper car trying to, paint something.
Well, and it goes to the shared leadership on this movie, kind of the left hand, right hand of the director and producer. I mean, my job is to block and tackle so that he can shine and that Christian can make the decisions. And in some ways it's like, I don't know, I don't have a great analogy, but it's like, I've got to be sort of the like lead person up the mountain, taking the rocks and the ice and the snow and whatever, give him enough protection to do his job. And he's being thrown a million questions all day, every day. And especially in a tense situation, he's got to be able to just make quick decisions. And the only way he can do that is if he has the trust of the essentially the blocker in front of him to clear the way to get it done. And I'm really proud of how we led on this movie. I mean, it really was a unique relationship. I mean, I'm the sole capital P producer on this movie, and that was by intention. I also think it might be Jason's fault because his book came out before we made the movie, and I decided that I wanted to make this my first solo climb as a producer, just to see what I didn't know, just to see what muscles were weak. How do I stretch myself? And so then when we, had our first kickoff crew meetings, we really talked about the idea that like, this is not a family. A family is a really poor analogy for what we're trying to do, but we are a team, right? This is Jason's analogy in his book. And we said like, no, this is a team. Right. And then because none of us are huge sports fans, it all fell apart. Like, I don't know if I'm the manager, Christian might be the quarterback. We don't know what happened, but people got it, that it was like, you look to me for the logistical, like how we're going to do this. Christian owns the creative. And then Christian and I together was like, you couldn't divide us. Like we, were in sync at every point about creative decisions, logistical decisions, and how we move this forward.
Well, actually, I got a question around that because a lot of the older I get and the more I get to be part of working with companies and just leading my own, the more I really believe in like the power of pairs. And it's just a really like the kind of the myth of the lone person is fascinating, but usually not true. And so then I'm really curious these days about the communication habits, relationship habits of partners, of pairs as they try to co-create something. I'd love for you guys to talk about like, what was your communication look? What did that look like? How did you resolve any kind of, I'm sure there were normal conflicts. You don't have to tell me what they were, but like how did you two, if you're talking to other leaders who also have like a right hand or a left hand or are working as a team together, like specifically pairs, what advice would you give them in order to work well together?
I don't look at, there's with a film, it is such a collaborative thing. But I think everything is, I do think there's a myth of this sort of like, I guess it's like the Elon Musks of the world or people that are sort of these legendary, and that's not to take away from anything incredible that they're doing, but it's just to say that there is an entire infrastructure and a team, and you really can't do things alone. That doesn't mean that there doesn't have to sort of be a leader in each category, in each department. You have to let people, the producer has their role, the director has their role, your heads of department have their roles, the actors have their roles. They each get to lead, but it is a group effort. And I do think that the most successful, though, people that I've seen in this business, like, Ron Howard and Brian Grazer, there's incredible director producer partnerships that really behind every big auteur director or big director, there's and not even behind, side by side with, there's a great producer. Jerry Bruckheimer in some cases is sort of the one who's leading that, his brand. But it's always a director producer collaboration because you're sort of co-captains of the two branches of the film, the industrial and the artistic side. And that's not even to say that it's binary in that way, because producers are incredibly creative. And I think directors need to also be business oriented and practical, but I think the thing that has been really special for us in this process is just that Nick and I share the same taste. I think it's safe to say that's key. We have the same values in terms of how we expect to be treated and want to treat other people. I think we have the same work ethic. And I think there's a shared integrity there that I think is really important. And I think integrity is something that's really hard to find, and especially integrity when there's pressure. Integrity is sort of the first thing I feel like to go out the window when there's pressure. And so that relationship for us was, that was the biggest sort of takeaway and win for me on this film, definitely. And yeah.
Yeah. And we still talk all day, every day. And I think just a lot of communication was a huge thing. And especially early on, I'm really grateful. Oh, I mean, this movie was really hard, but like, I'm grateful for early challenges we had because Christian and I had to learn each other's conflict styles. And we had fights. And what I'm proud of is that it showed the character of each other and that we both fought fair, right? It was never personal attacks. It wasn't character judgments. It was just each of us expressing fears and frustrations and concerns. And now when we have conflicts, like, we know it's going to be okay. But early on, you don't know if it's going to be okay because we haven't done the thing together. And you kind of go, is this going to work? Is this marriage going to last?
Yeah.
All these kind of things. But we did it.
Yeah, I don't think you can really get into the weeds of anything without a willingness to fight, because there's just too much repression then, and resentments build, but you have to be able to fight constructively, I think, because really at the end of the day, you're just, somebody has an idea of how they think it should go and the other one has a different idea, and it's really a battle of those two things.
Not to put you too much on the spot, but Christian, I'll have you go first, and then Nick. What would you say are your principles of fighting fair? No, and I say that with the context, both of you have a similar spiritual worldview, and you're both married, and I make up that those are great contexts for learning how to fight well. But so I'm curious, like, what would you say are some principles in the working space, how to disagree well, and how were you able to discover pretty quickly that this was going to work out?
Yeah, I mean, I always feel very strongly that you can't have a character assassination on the other person when you're fighting, and because if you don't respect somebody fundamentally, or you think they're dishonest, or you think they're a cheat in some way, you can't make a good deal with a bad person. You can't have a good collaboration with a bad person, I don't think. And so there was always just an underlying respect for Nick. I knew he was someone with integrity. I knew he was someone who was honest. And so it really was always a battle of ideas, rather a battle of ideas and strategy, and how to best execute that strategy or apply pressure at times when we needed to. And people have different feelings about that. Like, some people are more confrontational, some people are more diplomatic. There's different sort of strategies for how to, whether you're using honey or vinegar or whatever the phrase is, with somebody, like, and I think we have different styles in that way sometimes, probably just because our temperaments are a little different. Nick is more even keeled. I'm more in sort of present sort of rational, but then in private can be crazy. So, but that's why I'm the artist side of it, and I get to stay in my lane. Because that's not always productive, but sometimes it is productive. Sometimes you need to have somebody flip out, and I think that we learn to navigate that with each other. And maybe at first it was like, what's going to happen after this? That was bad. But then you recover, you realize, okay, no, this person still really trusts me, and we're moving forward. And then you can have those conversations, more easily in the future, and then really, like, get into the weeds about things that matter. You have to sometimes really push, and, you're kind of going to war with the other person, and that sounds so dramatic, but it's stressful, and so it's not always just going to be good times and high fives.
Yeah, and I think, just personally, I think I've grown a lot in empathy over the last probably 15, 20 years or so. And so for me, when I go into conflict, I try imperfectly to go, like, what is this person experiencing? Like, what, when Christian had a conflict, like, what's the underlying fear or concern or worry or whatever, and how can I alleviate that? But then also, sometimes that would push me to action, faster than maybe I was comfortable with, but it was the right speed, it was the right time. I mean, I tend to be someone who is a watch and wait, kind of wait for my time to act, and I'm not afraid of conflict, but I try to gather as much information as possible to then act. And Christian at times was like, no, you have to act now. And oftentimes that was the right thing. And then I could say to him, hey, I know this feels insane right now, but give me a beat and I'm going to protect you. And then that would sort of balance him out. And so there would be times when it wasn't about right or wrong, but like, one of our impulses was sometimes more correct in a situation. And it was the willingness to kind of mutually submit, or at least honor one another in that and that just takes time and trust. And then I think that trust then really, because we were able to do that throughout the process of development and financing and pre-production, when we got into production, that was kind of easier. We actually didn't have a lot of those we didn't really have conflicts in production. It was there were challenges, but we just knew that we both had different things we had to focus on. And then one thing we did that I think was really good was we drove home from set every day together. And we didn't come to set together. And I think that was important. Like Christian had to come in kind of prepared for that day's battle. I had to come in prepared for that. But at the end of the day, we could talk about what went well. What do we want to do better tomorrow? And sometimes it was sort of a hug and a high five and said, that was a hard day. Like, we weren't trying to optimize every moment. It was just survival and mutual love and respect.
Yeah, and it sounds like a big piece of that is understanding each other's differences, valuing those differences. And I know how important. Another friend of mine recently is like, "Hey, man, like a good script and great performances, and that's like 90% of the battle." Now I know that person probably hasn't done a lot with financiers, but and you worked with some pretty incredible talent on this. I won't go through the whole cast, but just the top four in terms of Dennis Quaid and Thomas Mann and Nick Offerman and Jacob Tremblay. And what's interesting about them is they're all in different stages of their career. Dennis has been doing this for a long time. Nick is like in the zeitgeist right now. Thomas has been a working actor, very successful a long time. Then Jacob, I guess he's been around for a long time, but he's so young. He's in many ways an emerging star. I think this next year is going to be huge for him. And talk to us a little bit about, because when you're working with a company, like in our firm, we've got people who are older than me that I'm working with. I've got people who are 20 years younger than me that I'm working with. What are things that and maybe I'll start with Christian as a director, like working with talent who are in different stages of their career and probably wanting different things from collaborating with you. Like, what are some ways that you were able to customize your approach to them that may be transferable to leaders leading different types of people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there definitely is a different approach with each person you're dealing with. I guess I'll sort of start youngest to oldest, like with Jake. He was 17, or I can't remember exactly a teenager. He's a teenager, and this role for him was really the first kind of role where we're seeing you kind of being introduced to him as an adult. And he has such an incredible body of work, but he's a kid. Like, his pockets were full of candy on set. He would like go to craft service and just be eating Snickers and things all day if we didn't watch, so, but what's amazing is you can have someone like that, but he has such an incredible emotional depth that there's really no age. I mean, I can't say that experience necessarily equals emotional depth or artistry necessarily in this field. I'm sure that there's craft that develops over time, and I could certainly see that, let's say, for instance, with Dennis, he was very direct about, Dennis is a legendary movie star. He's been doing this forever. He came with an idea about the character, and he was right. There wasn't a lot of back and forth. There wasn't a lot of workshopping. He's been doing it for so long. He had a read on this character. He told me what that read was. It was real casual. And I just thought, that's right. That I don't have any notes for that. So just do your Dennis Quaid thing. And he did it. And he kind of makes it look effortless. He showed up, he did his thing. And then you look at the footage, I can't say that there was no real battle to get there. You just look at the footage though, at the end of the day in the dailies, and especially in the cut, and you realize, wow, this is intense. Look what he was bringing, and I didn't even realize. So I would say for Nick Offerman, he's such a professional and such a great leader, and he's really in the prime of his career and stepping into, I think, this really new phase of his career, even from where it's been. I think people are really recognizing him, not just with this performance, but, The Last of Us. And, he's really being recognized for the caliber of actor he is now. And, but his preparation was incredible. I mean, he had these long monologues. I wrote it and I don't remember those monologues. And he would come in after just a few hours and just know the thing and know every beat of it. Um, and Thomas is just very collaborative and natural. And I think, again, not a ton of conversation there, but just had a beat on that character. So I can't say that my approach was necessarily, it wasn't hierarchical in terms of their age. It's not like I had less work with Dennis because he was more seasoned and more with Jacob. It was just different styles. And there certainly was a level of respect, and that I felt towards all of them. And I don't know that that would have changed with sort of their age. It was just a level of respect that I had just due to the artists that they are.
Yeah. As random side note, there is one scene when one of the actors gets tased, and I think I know the answer to this question, but just out of curiosity, did he actually get tased?
He did not actually.
No. I would have liked
would that
to have
would
taken
that be
them.
against regulations? Is that? I mean, I can imagine for realism, the actor being like, "No, like I want you to tase me."
He
I
did
know.
not want to get tased.
No, he didn't want to get taken.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. Well, and then it's interesting, just kind of follow up to that question in terms
Yep.
of how to work with the actors. So I really think of leadership in producing as a form of hospitality. And so I try to think about like, how am I caring for each of these actors in their different stages in life, career, everything to make sure that they feel loved and cared for and able to do their things, right? So Jacob's there with his parents, and Nick was there by himself. His wife, Megan Mullally, came out for a few weeks. Thomas flew in for a very short time. Dennis was there for a short time. And so for Nick and Jake, who were there for the whole shoot, it's like, organizing dinners and field trips and things that are like just ways for people to blow off steam because their workload is intense. And then, I think Nick developed like a cold during the shoot. And so it was making sure that he had chicken soup and things at his Airbnb. So, I would drop off groceries just to make sure that he was cared for. Dennis was in and out. And so it was like, hey, if we could wrap him early and get him on an earlier flight so that he's not away from his family for the weekend, we would do that. Like Thomas was there a short time. And so it was like, hey, let's go to the art museum. Let's go get barbecue. Like, let's just hang out. And you have to be careful. Some actors want that, some don't. But what it did was in the off hours, it allowed them to blow off steam, felt like they were cared for. But they also kept separation so that when Christian could work with them on set, that was a very focused time of work. And so separating kind of that work time and then relaxation, playtime, I think was really important.
Something that's interesting about that is it's I would imagine when you're working in production or you're working on a set, it's really clear that all the actors, and maybe this is just a subset of stardom, but like the actors have dreams and careers they're trying to nurture, and they're trying to go someplace, and you're interacting with their life for a short amount of time. It would be interesting if you're listening to this and you are more in like the corporate space to look at the people that you get to work with for this short amount of time. Sometimes it's, in film, it can be a month, or a couple of days even. In corporate life, it's oftentimes longer than that, years. But like, in the coaching work, we oftentimes say, hey, most leaders know what their vision is, but they oftentimes don't know what the vision is of the people who they're working with. And I make up that in the entertainment industry, you're pretty dialed into like what Nick Offerman is up to, and how can you play a small part in helping them get where they want to go and make the art you want to make. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think it even kind of links back to your last question about how to treat them. I mean, I think you know what you need to understand, what they're trying to sort of get out of this experience, and also what their strengths are and their working styles are. So you just have to be really adaptive to your team, to the people who are on your team. Like, I would know Dennis does not he likes to move really fast. He doesn't want to discuss things too much. If he gets in his head too much, that's not a good space for him. He's like a guy that wants to be doing. Nick is more methodical. He wants to be prepped on what he's going to need for that day. He wants to sort of talk about character, and then you let him have his space and he does these things. He's more sort of, Jake is a little more method and internal, and you have to just give him a lot of information and protect protect his emotional space and let him sort of get there on his own. I think it's really about knowing the strengths of the people that you need to perform and then giving them the environment and the tools to like let them do that. And in each case, it's really specific and different.
Yeah. And then tying that to the corporate world, which applies to the movie world as well, is recognizing why are they there? What is their primary motivation? So for those lead actors, they are all taking a fraction of their normal fees to come and do our little movie because it's a chance to play a different type of character. It's a chance to work in a different kind of environment. It's a chance to do something that's maybe a little more lived in or a little more natural. And sometimes it's a paycheck, And so I think about leaders in the corporate world. It's like your employees, like why are they there? Is it because they believe in your mission and the shared goal? Is it because you pay the most and have the nicest perks? And I think that it's not right or wrong, but I think when you recognize what those things are, you can sort of lead accordingly.
So earlier, Nick, you mentioned the word empathy, and I wanted to come back to that for a minute because it's been really interesting watching the reception of the film. And in many ways, and I say this, I felt this way as soon as I watched it. And Christian, I really do want to celebrate this wonderful thing that you've written and directed. It's like a Rorschach test. And what I mean by that is I can imagine, I'm gonna talk simplistically about political opinions just for a second. And we'll kind of put up like a barbaric lens on it as if people were one color, like red or blue. We're going to see both political parties be ruffled by this story a little bit. And I was expecting that, but to see it play out in real time at the Tribeca premiere was fascinating because the movie, like even the way the logline reads, it's like an anti-government extremist, which kind of already feels, like MAGA-y, gun culture and all this kind of stuff. And you don't pull any punches. You tell the story. You tell the story in terms of there are people who think that that guns are a solution and those types of things. And so I was expecting people like, let's say on the far right to be like, meh. And at the Tribeca Film Festival, which is not a Republican bastion, people during the Q&A raised their hand and it was like, don't you feel like this film is glorifying toxic masculinity and all that and celebrating gun culture? And I was like, oh, as a person who played an infinitesimally small role in supporting the film, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That was not the critique I was expecting to hear. And I was really trying to wrap my mind around, well, why would people feel that way about this film that is so obviously not trying to do that? And then I was like, oh, and the insight applies to both political extremes, but I wanted to toss it out and talk about it a little bit, which is we live at a time when people assume that if you're compassionate towards a point of view, that you agree with that point of view. And which means that you're not, and in that kind of political environment, you are not allowed to be compassionate towards views you may not agree with because people will then slap you with that label. And one of the things that I thought was very brave and wonderful and why people stick around for hours and talk about the film after they see it in good faith, respectfully, constructively, is because, Christian, the film is so compassionate towards these, not only, it's not that they are flawed, it's that they are fatally flawed.
Yeah.
And you are so compassionate to these characters. And to me, it's so refreshing to see characters who I obviously disagree with, but to have that lens told from a compassionate point of view. So 2 questions, and Nick, I know you have a story around this, but Nick or Christian, like, was that intentional? At what point of the story did you realize that was a theme? How did that evolve? Because I would love to see more art like that.
Yeah, I mean, it evolved really just from a natural place in writing it. I mean, I had a personal experience with a family member who was very close to me, who became involved in some very far out conspiratorial thinking as part of a mental health crisis and mental illness, really. And it had nothing to do with irrational belief, but it was something that he just got consumed with. And I really saw how brutally the world treated him. And it was, I think we are Yeah, and with this film, I thought this case and this specific thing, story in this film was a way to speak to that. Really, it was something personal and a personal perspective I could bring to this true story. But to your earlier point, like everything is polarized right now, and I think we're trained in our media to pick a team. And what you were saying, showing empathy or compassion for a perspective we don't agree with is like, sacrilegious. It's, betrayal. But really what that is it's asking people to re-engage with their humanity. It's asking people to take their dukes down for a second and be a human again. And that's nothing we're watching or consuming in our media, environment is priming people to do that, really. Like maybe Instagram accounts from certain people or certain people that are speaking out about things. But that was the aim of this film. It's like this is something that's happening in our country right now. It's a real reflection of the world. These are complicated issues. And I think the uncomfortable state that people get into watching a film like this is that it's presenting something in an honest way, and it's not simplified, and it's not picking a side. And so everybody feels sort of strange after that. It's like, well, wait a second, and it leaves people, it's funny to see the reactions. There's confirmation bias. Like sometimes people that are dug in, they're like, yeah, and you told them, and and I'm thinking, well, that wasn't really, then from both sides. And then there's people who are touched and sort of reconnect with that humanity and feel like, oh, this is so refreshing, and thank you. And then there's other people that you see just clammed up and they're like, this is not for me, and but that's good. That's the role of challenging art, and that's what we wanted to accomplish with this.
Yeah, one, it's a movie that raises questions more than it gives clear answers, and people get real uncomfortable living with questions and uncertainty, and they want to know where you stand on a certain thing and what's your perspective. And even before we made the film, law enforcement who heard about it were nervous that it was going to be, Hollywood comes to Arkansas to tell an anti-cop story. And then we engaged with them and said, no, it's not the case. And then they saw, and they were understanding. And we just had it in this last week when the trailer came out, which will have been a couple weeks before this podcast comes out. And there's a whole infrastructure now in media where they review trailers or will about trailers, and it's clicks and whatever. And one of the headlines, most of them are just like, new trailer, thriller, Nick Offerman. I'm like, okay. But one of them said like, pure propaganda garbage. And I'm like, I got to click on this. This sounds amazing. Click on it. And it's a website that takes a very hard stance on the issues of the day. We will say it's very kind of bro culture kind of thing. And the article was like, this movie clearly hates right wingers. And so I was like, I'm just going to reach out to the guy. And so I sent him an email and I said, hi, I'm Nick. I'm the producer of the film. I hope you'll watch the film, because we really were intentional not to make this a political thing because of the true life events. And I said, no response necessary, but just wanted to reach out. And then about an hour later, he reaches out and says, well, I hope that's the case. Something about the trailer just rubbed me the wrong way, but it takes a certain amount of guts to reach out after an article like that. So if you want to send me a link, I'll watch it with an open mind. So I said, great, here's the link, and tell me what you think, good, bad, otherwise. And about 4 hours later, he wrote, hey, Nick, I was completely wrong. This movie's incredible. And he went on to talk about the themes and just how much he appreciated this civil discourse, and said, with your permission, I'd like to write a follow-up. And then the next day he wrote an article calling the film one of the best of the year and saying it was incredible and owning the fact that he misjudged it. And I think that's so rare in this time. And it's not credit to me, credit to him, whatever. It's about that humanity piece. Like, we found common ground just to say like, hey, we're both human. Like, maybe there's something here for you. And I think that's what we hope. We want people to see this movie because we think there's something there for them.
I'll just for a second tell you my Rorschach experience when I watched it. And it was like, I heard a clinical psychologist say not too long ago that a child's greatest need is not to be loved by their parents, which is what I would have thought. And they were saying it's not that that's not important. It's just that's not the core thing. They said, yeah, a child's greatest need is not to be loved by their parents, but a child's greatest need is to love their parents. And wounds come by when we love our parents, we get hurt. And to me, this is like a wonderful, almost like ancient, almost like brothers and fathers, and like this kind of archetypal story of fathers and sons, and the capacity that fathers have to influence their sons and be influenced by them for better or for worse. And there was something so primal, like I really love my dad, and him and I've had a journey together trying to figure out how to be friends, I guess, as adults and things. And just watching the movie just really struck like a chord. The lazy question is to ask you guys to react to that. Because I know that's not I know there's like 50 threads, and part of the delight of film is people bring their own story to it. But I did want to share, at least from my perspective, like it's so funny that it takes place in such a politicized story. Like the story is so easy for the headlines and the clicks and everything to make it about the politicization. I don't even know how to say that word, but the politicizing of that deal. But for me, it was just, you could have put that story in 50 different contexts and it's still fathers and sons.
That's absolutely true. I mean, the movie is 99% that, and told in the setting of this story that also touches on these other themes, But the core of it is it's about fathers and sons. That's what the film is about.
Yeah, and I think it's fathers and sons, and not listening to loving women in the life. Like we got Martha Plimpton and Nancy Travis, who are both kind of these motherly figures, and they're presenting another way out. Like just what like not every not every nail needs a hammer, right? That kind of idea. And I think that but father-son relationships are so potent and hard and challenging even on the best days. And I think that Christian and I are both fathers and fathers to sons, and I think recognizing that responsibility, this movie's a cautionary tale, it's sort of a tragic coming of age story. And
that's right.
And hopefully people understand the importance of that relationship and the responsibility of it.
Now, I want to pivot to, if you got some time, I want to pivot to some of your stories, and both of you have wonderful careers in their own right, and with Nick, at least non-traditional in terms of your access point into film. So we'll start with Nick, because when you and I met, I guess you've always been like film adjacent. You've been in the film industry for a long time in a very specific way, but also you are like a classical entrepreneur. Like you had an exit, Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with business, and then of course teaching at UCLA, and like you have this such a eclectic career. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what that's been like, so they can get a context for your contribution to the arts?
Yeah, it's a very windy and twisty tale, but I mean the short version is, started my career in marketing and advertising up in the Seattle area, did a lot of large scale live events and productions for Microsoft and Nintendo, and I managed and produced punk rock bands and had an abiding interest in film and all kinds of stuff, and then decided to sort of focus, went to grad school at UCLA in the MFA producers program, came out of that program and found that, just being a producer was not a job. And so I went back into marketing and advertising while still developing feature films, and was able to make my first film in 2013. It came out in 2014. This movie called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It was a filmmaker named Anna Lily Amirpour that I went to grad school with. And but at that time, I had partnered with a commercial production company. And from that, I developed a relationship with one of the founders. In 2015, we started an automotive YouTube channel called Donut Media that grew to become the fastest growing automotive YouTube channel and sort of media company. And we grew it to, I think it's at 9 million subscribers now and 30 employees. And then we sold that business in 21. All the while, I'm still producing independent films, but what's paying the bills is marketing and advertising and consulting and every other thing. And so I maintain this track record of quality films that have premiered at Sundance, South by Southwest, Tribeca, that kind of thing. And then coming out of the pandemic, I was out on my own, and we sold the business. I ended up doing some consulting for Nike, helping them get into short form content. I ended up doing 2 podcasts with Bill Gates and his company, and then got to make a movie for Amazon, and then got to make Sovereign. And I think that I'm a really good builder. I don't think I'm wired, or probably just I'm not interested in operating sort of long-term stuff. So I love building things. So when someone says, hey, here's a new thing, let's go build a thing. It's like, YouTube, I don't know how that works. Let's figure it out. Let's build a team. This movie, let's build a team. Like, every one of these things is sort of like a heist movie. And, I get to be at times the Danny Ocean of it, and assemble my team and try to get after it.
Well, one of the things, Nick, having known you for a long time, that I like is you're a great example of the rejection of like pick a lane. And I think there's power in picking a lane. And so that actually is good advice most of the time. And you've done a pretty amazing job of, paying the bills, and you've got a family, and it's not a small one. And you got to take care of things, and also keeping this artistry piece of you growing and developing. We'll get to Christian here in the next question, but one last question for you in terms of like, what's your philosophy on that, and how did you justify having kind of a dominant lane and a secondary lane that has now become your dominant lane?
I think one of my purposes on this planet is to help create art and beauty. And that's really hard to do. And it's hard to do and make a living at it. And so because of the way my brain works, I've always known that, I'm going to provide for my family. I'm going to make sure everyone's taken care of, even if it's doing a job that I don't particularly care about in a given moment. But I'm not going to stop nurturing the true calling passion piece, which is about creating art. And, there's a lot of easier ways in this world to make money than filmmaking. And that's not my driving motivation. Like, we're on this planet for such a short amount of time in sort of an eternal perspective. And so it's like, all right, what am I getting after while I'm here? Who do I get to work with? And, I've been wired with a brain that just loves puzzle solving and problem solving and helping artists achieve their goals and just bringing more of that into the world, because I think it's important. And so it's less strategy sometimes and more just brute force. Like, I'm just going to keep driving in that direction, good, bad, otherwise.
Harry doesn't know how to fail.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good.
I'm telling you, that's who you are. Anyway, now Christian, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be trying to make this too distinct, but I feel like yours is more of you went to USC for film and for writing, and if you're paying attention at home, that is, if not the best, one of the best places to go for learning how to do what you do now for a living. Can I ask, how you got in? Like, I you had some talent, they saw that, and they wanted you to be a part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, USC was fantastic. I went to the undergraduate production program there, and filmmaking was something that I've always wanted to do. I came from an artistic family. My mom was a musician and a songwriter, and so I grew up sort of in the music business and adjacent to that. And the way I got into filmmaking is I sort of hated doing these homework assignments in high school. And one of my teachers said, well, instead of writing reports, since you obviously hate this, why don't you can submit little films to me instead. And I thought that was like the greatest deal in the world, even though these little films took me like weeks to do, whereas a paper probably would have taken a night. But once I started, I really realized I was kind of shy but it gave me an outlet to sort of be able to say something public, but I could do it by like dropping a tape and then running away, or sending a script and then running away. Like, I didn't have to stand there and sort of be, too visible with it. And so I've always done that. My path to directing, I always knew I wanted to write and direct, but it really took me longer than most, I think, to get the opportunity and just the confidence to do it. I directed a lot of music videos out of college. I kind of thought, well, I'll be a music video director and that's how I'll get to direct features. And then music videos were sort of hard and not paying a lot of money. And so then I worked as a cinematographer for a while. And I thought, I'll be a DP and I'll work up camera crew and then I'll get to direct. And then that was hard too. And I was like, this isn't conducive to and then so I thought, okay, well, I'll be an editor and I'll write scripts on the side, and then I'll sell scripts, and that will get me the opportunity to direct. And so then I did that. But then I sold a couple scripts, and they got taken away from me and turned into things that had nothing to do with what the script was. I was rewritten, so it was sort of like I kept trying to take these indirect paths to the thing that I wanted. And it really took me until I was in my mid 30s to have the confidence to be able to sort of just say to people, I'm a writer director. That's what I want to do. I remember one time I was with a good friend of mine who'd known me for years, and I'd been editing and doing all these other things, and we were getting a drink, and he turned to me like so innocently and said, well, man, so like, what are you trying to do? And I was devastated by that question. I remember I went home, I told my wife, I was like, he just asked me what I was trying to do. And it was so upsetting. I don't know why, and I realized I had just been scared to just take a direct path to what I wanted to do. And really, I think as Nick said, there's a lot of easier ways to make a living in the world than being a filmmaker or an artist. And I think there was a lot of guilt that I had to work through accepting my identity, because it's very important to me to provide for my family. It's very important that my kids and my wife feel like they're getting the best of me and I'm giving them the best. And filmmaking and artistic pursuits can feel pretty selfish at times. And, but I had to sort of like reframe that in my mind and just say like, it's not selfish if I'm giving other people something that they're getting something back from also, and like, if this is my gift that I have to give, or not to sound like, oh, it's my gift, but if this is the way I'm naturally wired, I just have to accept that and own it at the end of the day. And it's strange, but as soon as I did that, things started moving pretty quickly. 2.5 years later, we were shooting a film, and here we are now. So, yeah.
Well, what I love about that is I do think that you represent two different archetypes in terms of leadership. And, some people are able to find a way of like cobbling together multiple things as they go. And then other people has like a natural evolution towards the thing they're meant to do. What I really love, Christian, about your story is I like that it was in your mid to late 30s when someone was like, hey, what do you want to do? And you were able to pivot. I think a lot of people are listening to this. I think a lot of people listening to this a lot of people are wondering, is it too late?
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt that a lot. I wrote another script, about it that probably the theme of that script is it too late? It certainly took me much longer to get there, but I do think that there's also kind of old patterns and sort of models for like benchmarks in life that I think our generation as millennials are sort of breaking those patterns. People are doing things much later. People are having families much later, buying homes, so I don't necessarily think that, I don't think that should ever be. I think you don't really have a choice but to own who you are at the end of the day and what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, just to jump on that, I mean, I was a 30-year-old grad student. I was a 30-year-old intern, father of 3. I was a late bloomer as well. And I think partly youth is just so idealized. I don't want to say overrated, because I think youth has its advantages, and young people can do amazing things. But sometimes just having the patience to, take your journey and just try to stay curious and be a learner. I mean, Jason, we met probably, 2015, so 10 years ago. And I remember one of the first things, actually, before I met you, I heard you speak, and you had a metaphor, and I'm going to butcher it now, but it was basically that it was about like a sports car with the wrong engine in it. And it was like you need the right engine in the right car. And that just spoke to me in a way that I was like, man, I've had these kind of grown up in this indie rock mindset and indie film mindset, and like a lot of arm folding and like just judging and like, no, this thing's got to be cool. It's got to have cred. And even some of my early successes had some of that. And it was like, once I met you, I was like, wait, I've got to expand my thinking. Like, why am I limiting this gift? Why am I limiting this canvas to play on? And just having that empathy and that openness. I mean, Christian and I talk about this all the time. We were talking about this yesterday, that it's like, What'd you say, Christian? What's what's your analogy around cool?
I feel like cool is, I think I'm not making this up, but I feel like cool is the opposite of joy. Like cool is exclusionary and like joy is open and sincere. And I don't know that cool is sincere or open. I think cool is sort of hierarchical in a way and sort of exclusive. And I don't know that those two things go together really well.
Yeah, and even in a movie like Sovereign that's not joyful on its surface, like we had a lot of joy in making it, and we have a lot of joy in the partnership that we're forming to try to do more things.
Yeah, well, and that, passion, the etymology of passion is to suffer, so you know what you're passionate about when you know what you're willing to suffer for. And there's that phrase, I agree with you, Christian, or whoever you got that from, we can commandeer it, because there is the phrase like, never let them see you sweat. And I'm like, why not? Like, I want people to see me sweat. I want to sweat. I want to be enthusiastic. I want to care about things. I want to care about things so much that it embarrasses me. I want other people to care about things so that it embarrasses them, because that way I can show them that it's okay to care about things. And I think that you guys just have a great, that's your story. You're letting people, even in this conversation, you're letting people see you sweat. It was hard. Like the story making process was hard. And now you have this piece of art that I am so proud of you guys. It is, and again, like if you're listening to this or watching this, check it out tonight, check it out this week. Sovereign is a very, 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 by any measure or any standard, very good movie. And I'm sure there's some people who may not be ready for the emotional. By the way, it's a thriller. It's a weird thing it opens with something that tells you this does not end well.
Yep.
And then the rest of your time, you're just watching the machination work out of all it's not going to end well, but you don't know how it's not going to end well. And so every scene, you're just hooked watching these characters make a series of choices. And you're like, oh man. And that's good entertainment. It creates good conversation. And Nick, I've known you for a long time, and I believed in you for a long time. And Christian, we've only had a few conversations, but you're both really incredible people. And I'm excited for this to have an amazing run. Because if this episode will drop, I was trying to think, should we make this episode something that people can listen to a year from now? I was like, nah. So, once it's won all the awards, and once it's had all the success and the fame, and once you guys are on the red carpet and all the things and holding statues and all that, we can know that it didn't start in a glamorous place, but it sure did end up that way. So I really believe in this story and this film, and thanks guys for making it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks, Jason.
All right, we have a few more things to let you know about before we go. First, podcast reviews really help us serve more people. So if this podcast is helpful for you, we'd love your help to get it into as many leaders' hands as possible. Please leave us a review, even if it's not 5 stars. And if you really want to go the extra mile, let us know what you'd like to hear more of, or what you think we could do better to serve you and the people you care about. Okay, second, we have more resources for you online, and they're all free. We have free assessments, educational videos, articles from sources like Fast Company, written by our coaches and clients, all designed to help you use our tools in your everyday life and leadership. To dive into the free treasure trove of goodies we have for you, go to novus.global and then click on resources. Some of you have been listening for a while and you haven't yet taken that next step to hire a coach. This is your time. I can't tell you how often I've heard from clients around the world that they wish they would have talked to us sooner. If you have a sense that you're capable of more, we would be thrilled to explore what coaching could do for you and those you influence. Simply email us at begin@novus.global or click the link in the show notes. You also might be listening to this thinking, maybe you want to be a coach, or maybe you already are and you have a vision to build a 6 or 7 figure practice coaching people you love in a way that brings life to you and your clients. Well, that's why we created the Meta Performance Institute for Coaching. It is an in-depth coaching apprenticeship designed to help you create the coaching practice of your dreams. The first step in exploring that is simple. Just go to www.mp, as in Meta Performance, .institute. There we have free assessments to help you see what kind of training you need to create the coaching practice the way our coaches do at Novus Global. Thank you so much for listening. We love making these for you. And remember, dare to go beyond high performance.